I wanted to talk about one more story, a story that maybe you guys didn't hear about because it was paywalled or just due to the lack of general coverage it seemed to get on the headlines because Trump and profiteering off the presidency seems to go hand in hand.
Burns
These
is
are
an
two people,
immoral,
two
morally
topics,
corrupt, bankrupt man.
two concepts that know each other very, very well. So I wanted to talk about this article: "Make Money, Not War: Trump's Real Plan for Peace in Ukraine." Byline: the Kremlin pitched the White House on peace through business. To Europe's dismay, the president and his envoy are on board. Now, this article I thought was a real bombshell, but due to the fact that the president's cryptocurrency corruption, his family's direct profiteering off the presidency when dealing with Middle Eastern royals, or the private investment funds, or the cryptocurrency investments, or just how much we've seen the wealth of the Trump family balloon going into the second term, as they've all directly engaged in business dealings, not even waiting until this term's over, but as their term goes on. And I mean, we can go back to the first term to look at the buying out of Trump hotel rooms, but everything that's happening this term is making the first term look like nothing. From Qatari jets to cryptocurrency corruption, uh, it kind of makes it makes a lot of these stories pale in comparison when you just go out in public and just say, "Yeah, I'm going to get a jet," and you're so open about it. Where a lot of this story is more quiet. There isn't big bold proclamations where Donald Trump's going out there and saying, "Hey, I want to give my friends contracts on these minerals," or, "Hey, you know what? I'm actually interested in the future of the Russian sector here, and I want to make sure Gentry Beach, my college friend, Donald Trump Jr., my son's college friend, and a campaign donor of me, Donald Trump. I want to make sure he gets a stake in Russian Arctic gas projects after it gets released from sanctions. Or I want to make sure Stephen P. Lynch, who paid $600,000 to a lobbyist close to Donald Trump Jr., is going to who's seeking a Treasury Department license to buy the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Yeah, he wants to be in the front of the line there, right? So this type of, I lobbied the president, so I should be in the front of the line when it comes to deals on the market. This is manipulating the state, manipulating the government in order to get a private sector advantage. But Donald Trump, the businessman, is more than willing to do this type of wheeling and dealing. But that's the smaller detail. The smaller detail of, oh, Donald Trump Jr.'s college friend is going to be able to get the stake in the Russian Arctic gas pipeline because he's connected to the president of the United States. Oh, that type of wheeling and dealing. That's the smaller byline. There's also a second line here before the main line. The second line here is, should we be really benefiting the Russian government this soon after invasion? For example, in this article, it talks about Exxon Mobil and what ExxonMobil plans to do. Earlier this year, ExxonMobil met with Russia's biggest state energy company, Rosneft, to discuss returning the massive Sakhalin gas project in Moscow and Washington gave them the green light. In the days after Alaska, a European intelligence agency distributed a hard copy report in a manila envelope to some of the continent's most senior national security officials who were shocked by the contents. Inside were details of the commercial and economic plans the Trump administration had been pursuing with Russia, including joint rare earth mining in the Arctic. In secret talks, ExxonMobil senior vice president Neil Chapman met Rosneft boss, that's the Rosneft that Trump just put under sanctions, by the way, met Rosneft boss Igor Sechin, Putin's former private secretary, in the Qatari capital of Doha to discuss Exxon's return to the massive project, an investment stranded after Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Exxon billionaire investor Todd Boehly and others have explored buying assets owned by Lukoil. That's the other Russian energy company that Donald Trump also just sanctioned. Isn't that weird? The two big Russian energy companies that Trump just sanctioned are just so happen to be the two big Russian energy companies that ExxonMobil is looking to do big business with once Donald Trump basically lets down the gate and the horses, the horses are off to the races. Russia's second company to put its overseas assets up for sale. Elliott Investment Management eyed buying a stake in a pipeline that carries Russian natural gas into Europe. So This type of wheeling and dealing with Russia so soon after the invasion, before we know whether or not the Russians are really serious about not invading Ukraine again, when the Russians right now are still like saying, not okay, we accept that this was a bad idea. They're convincing the public that this was a great idea. They're writing their nationalist history of the war, their version of it, and they're still demanding more land. Not only the land that they've illegally conquered, but also land that they were not able to illegally conquer. They're still demanding uh, Konstantinivka. They're still demanding Pokrovsk. They're still demanding Kramatorsk. They're still demanding Slavyansk. They're still demanding Seversk and Limon and all these locations that are not controlled entirely by the Russian army, or in some instances, not at all. But they're demanding it as a precondition for these ceasefires to turn over to some sort of peace deal, while also continuing to beat away the idea of a strong security guarantee, which leaves open the idea of another invasion. And so, if we're going to leave open the idea of another invasion, investing in a country that it's still a question mark on whether it's going to invade Ukraine for the third time within 2 decades, I think that we should probably put that on the shelf. We should leave that until we have such strong security guarantees and such strong knowledge that Russia will not invade, and that we've settled everything with the kidnapped children, the occupied territory, the stolen Ukrainian art and history, and all of the stolen resources and the reparation. Once we've settled everything, then we can have a conversation about figuring out assets that can be invested, or profits that can be made. But before then, what you could be doing is investing in your own security crisis. And investing in your own security crisis is moronic. I don't put that beneath this administration, but I am just saying that it is moronic. Beach, Donald Trump Jr.'s college friend, was in talks to acquire 9.9% of an Arctic LNG project with Novatek, Russia's second largest natural gas producer, which is partially owned by Timoshenko, if the US and the UK remove sanctions on it, according to drafts and contracts reviewed by the Journal. In late July, Dmitry Benkov, the head of Russia's Roscosmos Space Agency, visited NASA's Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center in Houston, the first such visit since 2018, as well as the spacecraft manufacturing facilities of Boeing and SpaceX. By the time Zelensky arrived, Trump had spoken to Putin a day earlier and decided not to offer the Tomahawks. This was about the Zelensky meeting. Instead, Witkoff encouraged Ukrainian officials to try another tack. What good was a handful of missiles going to accomplish? Instead, he encouraged Ukraine to ask Trump for a 10-year tariff exemption. Why do you need weapons to defend yourself when you can have a 10-year tariff exemption? And here's the quote. "I'm in the deal settlement business. That's why I'm here," he told the Journal. "We keep on knocking at the door and coming up with these ideas." So we've got the problem of immediate corruption, of the profiteering. We've got the problem of investing in our own security crisis. But we've also got the problem of the president of the United States possibly being motivated by personal gain over national security. It's bad. Corruption's bad, period. Corruption that lines up with our national security interests, and corruption that lines up against our national security interests. But corruption is particularly bad when it lines up against our national security interests. Think about the situation in the United States right now on Ukraine. More Americans support sending weapons to Ukraine than at any other point in the war. That's really something that we don't think about right now. When you see the dialogue online and the dialogue in the space, sometimes you got to remind yourself that that 2 out of every 3 Americans wants to send more weapons to Ukraine, and thinks that it's not a good thing that we're not doing that. And it's not just the recent data from the Reagan Institute that is showing that there has been a recent increase in support for Ukraine. Americans wanted to see an end to the war, but after 11 months of failed negotiation, what they've seen is abject failure in diplomacy. And instead of continuing to get dragged around while the Russians bomb hospitals or bomb schools or bomb residential complexes and continue to grind forward the war and expand the air campaign and aggress their offensive operations, Americans don't want to see the American government respond to that with make the Ukrainian government concede more, give up territory, give up this, give up that. Not even a majority of Republicans can be convinced that we should convince the Ukrainians to give up their territory. Certainly not a majority of Democrats, not a majority of independents, and not a majority of Republicans. But that is the position that was being pressed on the Ukrainian leadership in recent days. So when you talk about what the American public wants, when it comes to what Trump has actually said on the campaign trail and what he, as to what he wanted to deliver, what he was going to deliver, when it comes to what's international security interests for our drone and research development, when I look on our social media platform for the United States Army and I see them making posts like, have you ever seen a drone drop a grenade before? Or seen them brag about being able to make an FPV drone that costs $70,000, and that's supposed to be a reduced cost, meaning that before it costs more. That shows that there are some improvements that could be made, need to be made. And if there's any any American ally that can assist the United States in making those improvements, it is the ally that has the most experience in drone warfare on the planet currently, the Ukrainian armed forces, who are currently making FPV drones at a much cheaper cost of about $3,000 per unit compared to your $70,000. Obviously, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but are you telling me you cannot cut that $70,000 price tag more than in half? Are you telling me that that's impossible? Because if we cannot use our purchasing power parity to the best of our ability, and the Chinese are just going to be able to produce 10 times the drones we can for a lot less cost, it's a losing effort here. The Ukrainians can help us in certain ways. And so when you line up the technological assistance, the testing of our weapons, the Ukrainian help with drones, when it comes to our national commitments and our national credibility, when it comes to what the American people want, when it comes to what just Trump promised on the campaign trail of, we're going to push them all together, we're going to say stop it, and if they don't, we're going to be aggressive. We might give Ukraine more weapons than Biden did. We're going to be so aggressive. All of this lines up towards Trump at least taking some action, but he refuses to. And so there should be some question asked, especially when we see so much profiteering from Trump's immediate inner circle, when it comes to Trump's son-in-law, or when it comes to specifically, as talked about in this article, the friends of Donald Trump Jr., when it comes to reopening the investments into this giant country. Does Trump think that it would be better for his family and his family's friends and his investors permanently to reopen business with Russia, not based on what would be most peaceful for Europe, most peaceful for the United States, but what would be best for his friends and his bank account? And I would like more information on these meetings. I want more information on these meetings. I want more information on these dealings. And I want to know who exactly is getting what contracts if sanctions do get lifted. Because that is a motivation that should be considered targeted, as in a motivation that shouldn't be on the table. We should be considering whether or not it's good for our national security interests, not whether it's good for the profits of those in power. And since at this point, profiteering in the White House is so embedded with each other, it's very hard to make out what is genuine national security interest and what is profit that's been wrapped in that flag, the flag of what's good for our country. We're no longer going to be making the penny, but you know what we're going to be making? Trump coins.